Vidkun Quisling, the man whose name became a synonym for traitor. He handed his own country over to the Nazis before they'd even finished invading it. Within hours of German troops crossing the border, he declared himself Prime Minister on national radio, a title nobody had given him, backed by an army that wasn't even his own. His name became a dictionary word, not a compliment. Vidkun Quisling had spent the years leading up to the Second World War building a political career in Norway that, by any conventional measure, had already failed considerably before the war even began. A former military officer with a genuinely accomplished early career, including humanitarian relief work in the Soviet Union during the 1920s that earned him real international recognition, Quisling had gradually drifted toward increasingly extreme right-wing, anti-communist, and eventually openly fascist political positions throughout the 1930s, founding his own political party, National Samling, which consistently failed to gain any meaningful electoral traction among Norwegian voters, never winning a single seat in the Norwegian parliament despite years of sustained political effort. By the late 1930s, Quisling had developed direct contact with Nazi Germany, traveling to Berlin and meeting personally with senior Nazi officials, including Hitler himself, presenting himself as a committed ideological ally who could help facilitate German strategic interests in Norway, specifically warning German officials that Britain might attempt to occupy Norway first to secure control of the country's strategically significant coastline and iron ore shipping routes, information and advocacy that historians studying the period believe directly contributed to Germany's own decision to prioritize invading Norway, a decision Germany ultimately executed in April of 1940. When German forces launched their invasion of Norway on April 9, 1940, Quisling, without any formal authorization from the actual Norwegian government, which was actively attempting to organize resistance and had specifically fled the capital to avoid capture, seized a national radio broadcasting facility and declared himself the new Prime Minister of Norway that same evening, a genuinely audacious act of self-appointed political theatre that stunned Norwegian officials and citizens alike, since Quisling held no legitimate governmental authority whatsoever to make any such declaration. This self-proclaimed government proved so immediately unstable and lacking in genuine public or even German support that German occupation authorities themselves, recognizing Quisling's declaration had created more confusion and instability than practical value, forced him to step down from this initial self-appointed position within days, instead installing a more conventional German civilian occupation administration to directly govern Norway for the following several years, a genuinely humiliating outcome for a man who had just declared himself his country's legitimate leader. Despite this early setback, Quisling continued actively collaborating with German occupation authorities throughout the war, and was eventually reinstalled by German officials in 1942 as Minister-President of a Nazi-controlled puppet government, a position that granted him genuine, if entirely German-controlled, formal governmental authority over occupied Norway for the remainder of the war, a role Quisling used to actively implement Nazi racial policies within Norway, including the deportation of Norwegian Jews to concentration camps, and to organize Norwegian volunteer military units to fight alongside German forces on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. What made Quisling's specific brand of collaboration genuinely distinct from other wartime collaborators operating under Nazi occupation across Europe was the particular combination of his self-appointed, theatrically premature declaration of authority, his documented active role in directly facilitating the initial German invasion through prior strategic advocacy, and his subsequent sustained ideologically committed collaboration throughout the entire occupation period, rather than a more common pattern of reluctant, circumstantial cooperation under direct occupation pressure that characterized many other collaborationist officials across occupied Europe. Quisling's name itself became genuinely, permanently embedded in the English language as a direct consequence of his specific wartime conduct, with Quisling entering common usage as a generic noun referring to any traitor who collaborates with an occupying enemy force, a linguistic development that occurred remarkably quickly, with the term appearing in British newspapers and even official government communications within days of his initial 1940 radio declaration, reflecting the immediate, visceral contempt his actions generated even before the broader scope of his wartime collaboration had fully unfolded. Following Germany's defeat in 1945, Quisling was arrested by Norwegian authorities as the occupation ended and was subsequently tried on charges including treason, murder, and theft. In a prominent, extensively documented Norwegian legal proceeding that drew considerable public and international attention, given Quisling's specific symbolic significance as the individual whose name had already become globally synonymous with wartime betrayal, even before his formal trial began. He was convicted on the majority of charges and executed by firing squad in October of 1945, becoming one of the relatively small number of formal Nazi collaborators across occupied Europe to face capital punishment specifically for the totality of their wartime conduct, rather than for narrower, specific war crimes alone. What makes Quisling's story endure as one of history's most significant examples of wartime betrayal isn't simply the practical scope of his collaboration, considerable and genuinely consequential as that collaboration proved for occupied Norway throughout the war, but the specific, singular way his name transformed from an individual historical figure into a permanent, generic linguistic symbol for treachery itself. A transformation so immediate and thorough that Quisling achieved a genuinely unusual historical distinction, becoming perhaps the only individual in modern history whose own name became the dictionary definition of the exact crime he was ultimately executed for committing. If stories like this, where a single act of self-serving betrayal became so infamous it permanently reshaped the English language itself, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.